Hey everyone, Harold Fisher here, anchor and host of the Daily Drum on WHUR. Welcome to another edition of HUR at Home Newsmakers on WHUR and all of our social media platforms. You know, good friends are hard to come by and sometimes even harder to keep. But when you have friends that are of a different race, that can create complications even within that loving space. Well, that is the story told in a new memoir by Wendy Sanford. She's also the founding author of one of the greatest books ever written about women, our bodies, ourselves. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But the book is These Walls Between Us, a memoir of friendship across race and class. Wendy, it is an honor to have you here on HUR at Home Newsmakers. Thank you so much for spending a little time with us.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm just delighted.
Absolutely. I am too. I have goosebumps just having, I really
Well,
having an opportunity to talk to you.
I have such respect for Howard University that I've been on having goosebumps all day myself. So there you go.
No, there you go. Both of us have goosebumps. Let's talk about this, this memoir, because this is not an easy topic, even within, as I said, that loving friendship space. Tell me about your friend and why you decided to pen this memoir after so many decades in this relationship.
Well, so the friendship that's at the heart of this book started when I was 12 years old, and really a girl, a 15-year-old who was no longer a girl because she'd been working since she was 11, African-American young woman came to work for my mother for a summer, just for a summer month to help her out. She was called to help her out, but it was really, she was a domestic worker and did all the hard work in our house so that my family could have a vacation. And it was a very lonely place for her. It was in New England. It was out on the beach. She came from southwestern Virginia. And I was close to her age and friendly, although utterly self-preoccupied. So she came back year after year. My mother would beg her to come, even though Mary developed a whole career in corrections and a very enlightened career. Anyway, so we then in our 40s discovered that we were really developing a friendship because we were both divorced. We were both single parents. She had this work in corrections. She was the first female corrections officer in Mercer County, New Jersey corrections. So she was paving the way for women. I was a women's health activist, and we got talking. And I once said to her, Mary, why did we become friends? And she said, there was no one else to talk to in that whole place but you. So it's not like I was this fabulous friend. It's like we were together, and I was curious about her. And of course, her job involved learning everything about me. And my role was not to even notice her in the way we were brought up. But the time we got to our 40s and feminism was in the air, and there was this incredible outburst of writing by African-American women, and we would novels and research, and we would share that with each other. And she finally said, Wendy, we should write a book together. No one would ever believe it. It'll make us a lot of money, which is not true about memoir. But anyway, so we set out to do it. And because of our very different lives, and because she worked 3 jobs to raise her family, I ended up doing the writing and interviewed her so many different ways. And it took so long. So we started 40 years ago, but it took so long because every time I would feel this is right, something would happen, a friend would critique it, or something would happen in our common life, like the white privilege, the white accountability movement, or some of the work by Ta-Nehisi Coates, or the Black Lives Matter movement. And I'd look at the book and I'd say, this isn't enough. This isn't ready. It isn't ready. So finally, Mary's 81, close to your mother's age. I'm 77, and we didn't have any longer to work on it. But it got very much better in the last 5 years because of texting. Because every time I interview Mary on the phone or in our kitchen tables or whatever, it's all my questions and her voice coming through me. With texting, yes, I ask the questions, and yes, she's writing to me, but she discovered her access to her own words in a way that writing on paper never did, and she never had time for anyway. So there's a lot in the book now just directly from Mary's text to me. So that's another reason it took so long. Yeah, I wanted it to be good, and I wanted it to honor her and the various books that have helped me understand her life and be a better friend. So it just took a long time.
One of the difficulties, as I said in the beginning, even the best of friendships that don't have the barriers of race have challenges.
Yes.
And I don't even like using that word challenges because it sugarcoats things.
That's
The
conflict. How about conflict?
You have conflicts, you have disagreements, you have problems, you have arguments.
You have things you don't tell the other person for 20 years, and then what do you do?
Exactly. You have all of those things. Mm-hmm. And that can be, problematic. What kind of things did you have like that with her?
It's a very interesting question. I would have to say that so much of the barrier between us, two big barriers. One is she came into my family to serve my family. I was clueless. I would say the biggest barrier was my cluelessness. And when we started talking and I realized how little I knew about her life when she knew so much about mine, I just set out on a project to read, and I read and read and read works by African Americans. And I think that my ignorance and my cluelessness was a barrier for a long, long time. And as you know, that ignorance is it's politically and socially set up. I was raised not to know and not to look and not to care to know. And so it took a long time, and we came to tell each other more of the truth. There's a funny scene in the book where I try to say the word black out loud to her for the first time. Mm-hmm. And there's a whole paragraph about how hard it was to get out of my mouth because I wanted to be conscious. I was becoming conscious that our different races gave us each such different experiences because of how we were treated in the world, and that it was important for white people to talk about race and to understand that what all the whiteness brought us in terms of privileges, unfair advantages. But just to even say the word out loud for the first time, she teases me now about it. But when I finally got the word out, she said, "Wendy, if you walk on eggshells like that, I won't be able to talk to you the way I do." And that's one of the most important learnings in any friendship, really, is you can't walk on eggshells. You need to honor the person and know as much as you can about them, particularly with a white and a black person, without the white person depending on the black person to teach them everything about racism. White people have to go do a lot of learning on our own to be dependable friends, I think.
That's a word, to be dependable friends. What else did your friendship with Mary do for your relationships with other white people? Did it create conflict? Did it create teachable moments?
Okay, well, I'll take two angles on that. One is Mary has said, as we became closer friends, my parents were not so comfortable with that. And she says she remembers we had to whisper a lot when we were in the house together. So that's one area that it really impacted. The other is I wouldn't single-handedly credit her with saving my marriage, but she did. She played a big role when I was having a 7-year itch that they talk about. I've been married to the same woman for 42 years, where it's a blessing. But at one point, Mary visited us and saw that my eye was straying a bit. There was stuff going on. And
No.
yes. And she finally said, Wendy, you'd be so crazy and stupid to let go of Polly. She's a gem. She's a jewel. Don't do it. And, that was 30 some years ago. So so she did really affect that relationship, in a good way. I'm not sure that's quite the question you asked, but those are the two things that came up for me as you asked it.
Well, it lands where it lands.
Yeah.
I only have a few minutes left, and I think I'd be remiss if I didn't provide the full context for our viewers to have them understand who you are. There are viewers from of a certain age, and as I said in the beginning, you are the founding author.
A founding author, just
a founding author.
There's so many of us. Yeah.
So there were, that's right. There were many of you of our bodies, ourselves, and as I said, one of the greatest books ever written about women's health, about women's sexuality. And I remember the book as a child because it was coffee table size. It was over the years, it got smaller because that's the way things, but the information was no less valuable.
Mm-hmm.
Here we are now, decades after the book was first published. And I would certainly recommend that book, even to this day, to mothers and daughters and women who need to understand not only the history of the book, but themselves.
Mm-hmm.
What does that book mean for you all of these decades later?
It changed my life totally to be working with those women on that book and to progress over the years with that book from a group of very urgent white college-educated feminists to begin to understand that when we said we women this, we women that, we had no idea about women. We just knew our little sector. And it was so incredibly important to learn that women and we women was so much wider, and to begin to draw more and more of that into the book. And the book, that's one of the reasons the book got bigger and bigger. It's for many years because more women's experiences and voices and the politics around women's lives and women's access to good health care became, we realized we couldn't just write about our own experience. We had to open up and learn so much more. Most recently, the changes were around gender issues and trans women and but before that, we opened, the women in disability, women with a wonderful self-help group around women with disabilities wrote a chapter on body image, and the National Black Women's Health Project, which is now the Women's Health Imperative, Black Women's Health Imperative, played a big role in stretching our minds and helping us see what we weren't seeing, like about sterilization abuse, issues that hadn't affected us in our protected enclaves, but that were crucial health issues for women. Maternal mortality among Black women. You look at Serena Williams, one of the wealthiest Black women in the world, had terrible trouble in her childbirth and post childbirth, and that was a problem we started, trying to tackle, and that was 40, 50 years ago. So things haven't gotten better. Too many things haven't gotten better.
Yeah, I'm just thinking back. There's this flood of information that is coming back about, women's health and the things that, again, as I said, that I probably was too young to read, or shouldn't have been reading,
but they were fun.
But important.
Yeah.
I think important information. I mean, just because, of course, your book came after, the groundbreaking work by Masters and Johnson, of course. And then you may have been familiar with the Height Report, which
totally, yes,
which was another groundbreaking book on that groundbreaking survey on women's sexuality. That book was more than 400 pages, and so I think that our bodies, ourselves, and the work that you and others did on women's sexuality still lives. It still lives.
And there's a whole new concept that's gotten into later versions of the book around consent. I mean, we were a lot about women affirming our sexuality and having a right to our sexuality. And there was a chapter also on violence against women, and the whole concept of the crucial centrality of women's consent brings those two together in a really important way today, I think.
Your work is not done, memoir notwithstanding. I want to thank you so much for spending some time with us. Wendy Sanford, congratulations.
Great to talk with you. Great to talk with you.
Absolutely. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
That is it for this edition of HUR at Home Newsmakers. I'm Harold Fisher, and as always, I'll see you on the radio.